The scaffold stands black against winter sky. A crowd of thousands presses against military barriers in Whitehall, their breath freezing in January air. Inside Banqueting House, a man in black walks beneath ceiling paintings celebrating his father's divine kingship, paintings he himself commissioned 20 years ago. King Charles I of England steps through an upper window onto the scaffold. In moments, he will become the first English monarch executed by his own subjects. This is January 30th, 1649, the culmination of 7 years of civil war that tore England apart, and London made it possible. Welcome to Arthur's living history. Have you ever wondered how a great capital city came to reject its king, build massive fortifications against him, and ultimately approve his execution? Let me explain. The story begins not with war, but with frustration accumulating over decades. Charles Stuart became King of England, Scotland, and Ireland in 1625, inheriting his father James I's belief that monarchs ruled by divine right, answerable only to God. Parliament, representing England's nobles, gentry, and emerging merchant class, believed kings must govern within constitutional limits. Charles disagreed fundamentally. Within 4 years of his coronation, Charles dissolved Parliament 3 times when they questioned his authority. In 1629, he began what became known as the personal rule. 11 years governing without Parliament, raising taxes through questionable legal manoeuvres, imposing unpopular religious policies that seemed dangerously close to Catholicism.
Salve Regina.
His French Catholic queen, Henrietta Maria, alarmed Protestant England. His attempt to impose Anglican practices on Presbyterian Scotland provoked the bishops' wars. By 1640, Charles desperately needed money to fight the Scots and was forced to recall Parliament. The Parliament that assembled in November 1640, later called the Long Parliament, had scores to settle. Led by John Pym, they dismantled Charles's personal rule piece by piece.
Must resist this tyranny. Down with the taxes. Burn the ledgers.
They abolished the hated taxes.
Penny. To the fire with it all.
They impeached his chief minister, the Earl of Strafford, and forced Charles to sign his execution warrant. They demanded control over the army. Charles felt his divine authority crumbling beneath him. On January 4th, 1642, Charles committed an act that sealed his fate. Followed by 400 armed soldiers, he burst into the House of Commons, attempting to arrest 5 members on charges of treason. The members, warned in advance, had fled. Speaker William Lenthal, confronted by the king demanding to know their whereabouts, delivered words that echo through parliamentary history. "May it please your majesty, I have neither eyes to see nor tongue to speak in this place, but as this house is pleased to direct me." Charles left empty-handed and humiliated. Days later, fearing for his family's safety, he abandoned London for the north. He would never peacefully enter his capital again. London, that vast, wealthy, strategically vital city of nearly 400,000 souls, had chosen Parliament over its king. This was no small matter. London controlled England's largest port, its commercial wealth, its financial networks. The Royal Mint, the Tower of London's arsenal, the trained bands, London's well-equipped militia, all belonged to Parliament now. London's merchants, many of them Puritans suspicious of Charles's religious policies, funded Parliament's cause. Without London, Charles could not win.
London remains the key, despite their hold.
He knew it. Parliament knew it. The entire nation knew it.
Make way for the munitions! Get these horses!
Charles established his headquarters in Oxford, 60 miles northwest of London. In August 1642, he raised his royal standard at Nottingham, formally beginning the Civil War. Both sides believed it would end quickly after one decisive battle. They were catastrophically wrong. The first major engagement came October 23rd at Edgehill in Warwickshire. Charles's nephew, Prince Rupert of the Rhine, a brilliant 23-year-old cavalry commander, led devastating charges that smashed parliamentary lines. But neither side achieved decisive victory. When fighting ended at dusk, both armies claimed success. More importantly, nothing blocked Charles's path to London.
God save us, we must secure
Londoners panicked.
Hurry, they say the gates will close by noon.
The King's army, flushed with partial success, marched down the Thames Valley. Prince Rupert's cavalry swept through towns: Banbury, Oxford, Reading, Windsor. On November 12th, Rupert stormed Brentford, just 12 miles from London. His troops sacked the town thoroughly.
Cavaliers are advancing on Brentford. We must warn them.
Reports of looting and violence reached London within hours.
This secures our commitment to Parliament. Indeed.
Property owners who might have wavered now sided firmly with Parliament.
He calls this a proclamation of peace. There's naught but butchery, I say.
The King had sanctioned plundering English subjects.
Faster men! To
Parliament's
Turnham!
commander, Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, raced to intercept Charles. But could he stop the Royalist advance?
Vanguard! To your horses, quickly! Aye, Captain. We are exposed here, Colonel. Their numbers far exceed.
His professional soldiers were outnumbered.
To the flanks to prepare for engagement.
Everything depended on London's citizens proving willing to fight their own king.
Pikemen, to the centre! Musketeers!
They proved spectacularly willing.
Men of London, the enemy approaches.
On November 13th, 1642, 24,000 men assembled on Chelsea Field and marched west to Turnham Green. 6 regiments of London-trained bands under Philip Skippon formed the corps, part-time militia, shopkeepers and craftsmen, but well-drilled and equipped.
Forward march! To the western road! By your...
Essex's professional soldiers formed around them.
Form up on the left flank, move lively now! Pike...
Lord Warwick brought additional forces.
Take your station!
Volunteers by the thousand grabbed whatever weapons they possessed. By 8 o'clock that cold Sunday morning, the parliamentary army spread across 3 connected commons: Acton Green, Turnham Green and Chiswick Common Field, the last open ground west of London. They deployed in traditional formation, cavalry on the flanks, infantry centre stretching from what's now Chiswick House Gardens to beyond Acton. Their line extended farther than Charles could match.
Look at the length of their deployment.
The Royalist army, perhaps 13,000 strong, faced an impossible situation. Charles and Prince Rupert could see they were outnumbered almost 2 to 1. Worse, the parliamentary forces visibly included thousands of armed civilians, London citizens defending their homes. Advisors warned Charles that slaughtering London's shopkeepers would destroy any hope of reclaiming the capital politically. The city must be won by hearts, not just force. Artillery on both sides fired desultory rounds. Minor skirmishing occurred. John Hampden led 6 regiments to outflank the Royalists from high ground to the north, but Essex recalled them, unwilling to risk his inexperienced troops in complex manoeuvres. The 2 armies stood facing each other for hours in winter cold. Londoners in the parliamentary ranks shivered, gripped weapons with frozen hands, stared at the King's banners snapping in the wind. Charles blinked first.
No! Form up! Retreat! By order of His Majesty, fall back!
By afternoon, the Royalist army withdrew westward through Brentford toward Hounslow Heath. Fewer than 50 men from both armies died that day, but strategically, Parliament won decisively. London remained secure. Charles retreated to Oxford, which became his wartime capital. Never again in the war would Royalists come so close to capturing London. Without London, they could not win. The confrontation at Turnham Green terrified Parliament's leadership. What if Charles returned with a larger army?
Hold the chain steady there. Aye, it's frozen.
What if he attacked from a different direction? London needed proper defences. In March 1643, Parliament issued orders for the most ambitious construction project London had seen in centuries. 20,000 workers began digging. Trades suspended normal operations. Entire guilds turned out with shovels. Women and children laboured alongside men. Even the wealthy contributed physical labour. It became fashionable to show commitment to the cause by working on the defences. What they created was staggering. 18 kilometres of ramparts and ditches encircled London from Wapping in the east to Pimlico in the west, Vauxhall to Rotherhithe south of the Thames. 23 forts studded the line, each equipped with cannon, eventually over 200 guns total. The fortifications took a year to complete. William Lithgow, a Scottish travel writer, described them in awe. 24 forts in all, and upon them planted and resettled 212 pieces of cannon. These weren't simple walls. The forts followed sophisticated star-shaped designs that gave defenders maximum fields of fire. Earthen ramparts could absorb cannon fire that would shatter stone walls.
The earth absorbs the blow entirely.
Ditches 10 feet deep and 15 feet wide made assault suicidal. At vulnerable points, wooden stakes created additional barriers. The lines of communication, as they were formerly called, transformed London into a vast fortress. Interestingly, the Venetian ambassador noted the defences served dual purposes, protecting London from the king, but also protecting Parliament from London's potentially volatile population.
Ready the charge! Port side traverse! They face the city.
The forts could control the city's own citizens if necessary.
Halt there! What's in the barrel, merchant? Salted herring.
Power always requires securing oneself against multiple threats. Behind these defences, London became Parliament's beating heart. Wealth from trade-funded armies. The Navy stayed loyal to Parliament, controlling the seas. Printing presses produced pamphlets arguing parliamentary positions. Censorship had ended when bishops left Parliament in 1640, unleashing unprecedented public debate.
And so I say unto you,
Puritan preachers thundered from pulpits about tyranny and God's judgment.
the king's men care not for the common folk. We demand reform. Read all about the latest.
London seethed with political and religious fervour. The war ground on for years.
They take Bristol so easily. We cannot hold the line much longer.
Initially, Royalists seemed ascendant in 1643, controlling the west and much of the north. But Parliament allied with Scotland, and in 1644, the tide turned.
Day is decisively ours, gentlemen.
The crushing victory at Marston Moor ended Royalist control of northern England. Parliament created the new model army, England's first professional, nationally funded military force. At Naseby, in June 1645, Thomas Fairfax and Oliver Cromwell destroyed Charles's main army. By June 1646, Charles had lost.
We deliver the chest as stipulated.
And we accept custody.
He surrendered to the Scottish army, who promptly sold him to Parliament.
These terms are unacceptable. We must reject them outright. Peace is paramount.
What followed was political crisis. Parliament tried negotiating with Charles, but the king, convinced of his divine right, refused meaningful compromise. He plotted constantly to restart the war, making secret deals with the Scots, the Irish, anyone who might restore his power. In 1648, these intrigues sparked the Second Civil War.
Move quickly, or all is lost.
Once again, Parliament's armies crushed Royalist forces.
By signing this, we commit ourselves to the
This time, the army decided Charles Stuart must face justice. Many in Parliament still hoped for negotiated settlement, but the army, radicalized by years of fighting, convinced God had given them victory, demanded accountability. In December 1648, Colonel Thomas Pride's soldiers prevented moderate MPs from entering Parliament, leaving only the Rump Parliament willing to try the king. Of 135 commissioners appointed to try Charles, only about 68 actually sat in judgment. January 20th, 1649. Westminster Hall, that magnificent medieval chamber, hosted proceedings unprecedented in English history. The High Court of Justice convened to try a reigning monarch for treason. Charles, dressed entirely in black, refused to recognize the court's legitimacy. He would not remove his hat, would not enter a plea, would not cooperate in any way. When Solicitor General John Cook began reading charges, Charles tapped him sharply with his cane, ordering him to stop. Cook continued. Charles struck harder. The silver tip of his cane broke off, clattered to the floor. Nobody moved to retrieve it. The King of England stooped to pick up his own cane tip himself, a small humiliation that foreshadowed greater shame to come. The charges accused Charles of waging war against Parliament and people, of being a tyrant, traitor, murderer, and public enemy to the good people of this nation. Charles maintained his position throughout. A king answerable only to God could not be judged by subjects.
Wherefore this court doth adjudge thee, Charles Stuart, to be a tyrant.
The court declared him guilty on January 27th. 59 commissioners signed his death warrant, including Oliver Cromwell, who reportedly signed with particular force. Charles spent his final days at St. James's Palace. On January 29th, he was permitted to see his two youngest children, 14-year-old Elizabeth and 10-year-old Henry, for one last time. He instructed Elizabeth to remain faithful to Protestant religion and tell her mother his thoughts never strayed from her. He warned young Henry never to let Parliament make him a puppet king. He divided his remaining jewels among the children. The night before execution, Charles burned his personal papers and ciphers. He prayed with Bishop William Juxon. On the morning of January 30th, he rose at 5 o'clock and dressed carefully, all black, with his blue garter sash. He requested an extra shirt from his attendant, Thomas Herbert, explaining that he didn't want crowds to see him shiver from cold and mistake it for fear. At 10 o'clock, drums beating, soldiers escorted Charles across St. James's Park to Whitehall Palace. He waited in his bedchamber for 3 hours. At 1 o'clock, they came for him. He walked through Banqueting House, beneath Rubens' magnificent ceiling paintings glorifying monarchy, his commission, his pride, now witnessing his destruction. The scaffold stood outside at first-floor level, draped in black. Thousands packed Whitehall, held back by soldiers. More watched from windows and rooftops. Charles emerged onto the scaffold with dignity that moved even enemies. He wore 2 shirts against the cold. He spoke briefly. The crowd stood too far away to hear clearly, but his words were recorded. A subject and a sovereign are clean different things, he declared, defending absolute monarchy to his last breath. He forgave his executioners. He prayed with Bishop Juxon. He told the bishop he was exchanging a corruptible crown for an incorruptible one. The executioner and his assistant wore masks and wigs to conceal their identities. Killing a king was dangerous work, whoever ultimately won. Legends claim it was Richard Brandon, London's common hangman, but no one knows certainly. Charles placed his head on the block. He stretched out his hands as the signal. The axe fell once. The executioner lifted the severed head, declaring, "Behold the head of a traitor." A groan rose from the crowd. Some said a groan of horror, others satisfaction. The crowd surged forward, dipping handkerchiefs in the king's blood as relics. Charles's body was embalmed and buried quietly at Windsor Castle beside his beloved third wife, Jane Seymour. The execution shocked Europe. Killing an anointed king seemed to overturn the natural order. But in London, church bells rang celebrating the end of tyranny. Parliament abolished the monarchy, declaring England a commonwealth. Oliver Cromwell emerged as Lord Protector, though he refused the crown. The experiment in republican government lasted 11 years until Cromwell's passing. In 1660, exhausted by Puritan severity and governmental instability, England restored the monarchy under Charles's son, Charles II. Charles I's execution remains one of British history's pivotal moments. It established the principle that monarchs could be held accountable, that sovereignty ultimately rested with the people, not divine right. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 confirmed these principles, creating the constitutional monarchy that endures today. Parliament's fortifications were demolished in 1647 once the Royalist threat ended, but their purpose was served. London had defended itself, secured Parliament's victory, and enabled the unprecedented, the trial and execution of an English king. That black scaffold at Whitehall, that moment when the axe fell, represents the violent birth of modern constitutional government. A bust of Charles marks the execution site today outside Banqueting House. Every January 30th, a service commemorates the event. The 10 on Horse Guards clock remains permanently blackened in remembrance of the execution hour. London remembers that bitter winter day when a city's choice to support Parliament over King culminated in regicide. Judicial murder to some, revolutionary justice to others, transformative moment in history to all. If you want to explore more moments when London shaped world history, subscribe to Arthur's Living History. I'm Arthur, and I want to know, what historical event should I recreate next? Let me know in the comments.